The Subcommittee on Defense will come to order. This morning, the subcommittee will hold a hearing on the posture of the National Guard and Reserve components. This will be a two-panel hearing. Panel 1 recognizes the Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Panel 2 will recognize the Reserve component chiefs from the Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Force Reserves. I would encourage all members to stay for both panels. Our witness for Panel 1 is General Joe Lengyel, Chief of the National Guard Bureau. We're pleased to welcome General Lengyel, a 4-star sitting member of the Joint Chief of Staff. Welcome, and welcome to the subcommittee hearing, your first time to testify as Chief. As Chief of the Guard Bureau, General Lengyel will address all Joint, Army, and Air National Guard questions. General, we've known each other for a long time, and as Chairman, I value your knowledge and your experience in leading the National Guard. Given the challenges our nation faces, we want to ensure that you have the resources and support to accomplish your mission. This subcommittee has provided the Guard with additional resources through the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Account, an appropriation which has never been included in the President's budget request. Additional funding for counter-drug operations, HMMWVS, helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, and more. However, we're concerned this is not nearly enough when you take into account the funding is significantly less than the vast resources available to the active component. Our country stands for strength, and citizen soldiers are the background and the foundation of that strength. There are limited resources and significant needs. We should not make decisions in a vacuum. We'll rely on your best military advice to guide these funding decisions. We look forward to your testimony and your insight, but first I'd like to call on the ranking member, my friend Pete Luckey, for his comments.
Well, I simply want to thank the chairwoman for holding the hearing today, and General, for your service and your testimony. I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
General, please proceed with your testimony. A full written testimony will be placed in the record. Please feel free to summarize your oral statement so we can leave enough time to get to everyone's questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you very much. I think I say that to you and to Ranking Member Skloski and distinguished members of this subcommittee, it is a pleasure for me to be here today, and I look forward to talking to you about the men and women of not only the Army National Guard, but also the Air National Guard. In summary, the National Guard focuses on three things. It focuses on our warfighting mission, the homeland mission, and building partnerships. And thanks to the support from this committee, I can tell you that the National Guard that I have the honor to represent here today is the most ready it's ever been, I think, or the most capable National Guard it's ever been in our 380-year history. As I talk to you today, we have 18,000 men and women deployed in every combatant command around the globe. In addition to that, I have 4,000, you have 4,000 of your men and women working for Homeland Defense and Homeland Security missions here today, and we have made and continue to develop robust partnerships with not only our international partners through the State Partnership Program, which is about to go to 79 partnerships when we formalize the relationship with Malaysia here in the near term. Thanks to you and the funding that this committee has provided, that State Partnership Program has taken on a strategic impact that I think maybe when we developed it, we didn't see that it was becoming. This committee provides the resources for us through INGRIA, as you mentioned in your remarks, to maintain a force that is first ready for the warfight, but used as a dual nature force, as it is our job as the National Guard to be ready to provide those forces here in the homeland when the governors and the states need us to do that. And never have we been more ready to do that, whether it's fires or floods or winter snowstorms or terrorists, such as bombs blown up in Boston. The National Guard is there, and we're trained, and we're ready because of the resources that this committee has chosen to give it. The relationship with our parent services, the active duty Air Force and the active duty Army, I have to tell you, has never been better. My relationship with General Milley and General Goldfeed, who I understand testified yesterday, have committed to a total force that includes an operational use of the reserve component. And if I have one ask of this committee today, It is to maintain the reserve component, in my case, the National Guard, as an operational force. We have been driven to that because of the demands placed on our Department of Defense and the global nature of the threat. The services have had to rely more on the use of the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard than ever before, and because of that, they are willing to invest in us, invest in our leaders, invest in our training, and because of the resources this committee gives us, we have the equipment, the people, and the training to go there. Can we use more? Can we get better? Yes, we can. But I report to you today, and I thank this committee today for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. I want to make members aware that we will be using a timer for each member, and you have 5 minutes, including questions and responses for the witness. A yellow light on your timer will appear when you have 1 minute remaining. If time permits, we'll have a second round of questions. I'm going to ask a question to begin. General Lengyel, full spectrum readiness training has been suppressed over the past 15 years due to combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. In recent years, sequestration further squeezed the readiness dollars needed to resume such training. Could you describe the impact this has on military readiness now and in future years, and how does the FY 2018 request begin to address those concerns?
Yes, ma'am. I think that, you address the problem that the service chiefs have talked about in terms of the ability to maintain full spectrum readiness for their force, mostly because of the demand on that force and the limited funding to sustain things like flying hour programs, complex training scenario programs. But we are beginning to dig out of that and rebuild readiness inside the services and inside the National Guard. The Army National Guard and the Air National Guard have been used in an operational sense, which has allowed the services in some cases to maintain or rebuild their readiness. Sequestration clearly is going to limit every aspect, would limit every aspect of our ability to do that, should it come in the future. And I would tell you that predictable and dependable funding is probably the single most important factor that we in the National Guard need so that we can plan to recruit our people, so that we can plan to train our people, and so that we can maintain our equipment and recapitalize our equipment through the services as we normally do. So I think that clearly readiness is funding related, and this budget begins to build some of that back, but it's going to take a long time before all of the things, the recapitalization and modernization of the force is fully complete.
Thank you. Mr. Visklowski. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to touch on something, and then I have a question. So I'm glad you're here today, in part because we're going to learn a lot more on how we can be a proactive partner in making sure that the Guard remains the successful part of our military force that it is. But I also want to take this opportunity to reinstate some concerns that I have with you about the family assistance specialist. It's still causing a lot of concern among my Guard members, family members, constituents, which include the businesses that employ these Guard members, and many, many people in Minnesota, and I know other states as well. As we talked about in my office, these specialists provide critical benefits and assistance, and Minnesota alone, there were 1,700 cases handled by these folks. Now, I understand there's been a new contract issued, but folks, when someone's hourly wage increase for a job that they're doing is cut from $21 to $11 to $14 an hour, it sends a message to the people who had been previously doing this job: you can work for less money, or your work is not valued. So we're going to be watching to see what happens with county veteran service officers in Minnesota's caseloads, what happens in our congressional office with caseloads now that the expertise isn't there. So I know you're going to be monitoring this too, and change is always an option, and we need to maybe work with a new vendor or figure something out. If this is a problem, maybe it won't be, but we're a little alarmed. What I would like to focus on is the 5 National Armored Brigade combat teams. Currently, the operating tempo has been drastically increased to the number of training days from National Guard soldiers from 60 to 90. That's an extra month, right, on average. So we know this increase in training days is important, but along with what we have happening with mobilization deployments is putting more and more of a burden on the quality of life for soldiers, their units, and their families. So I'm concerned, the Minnesota National Guard's concerned about long-term retention in these brigades. I know we want to make sure that we have a great readiness posture so everybody's able to perform their job successfully and come home safely. But can you tell me how you're going to be monitoring and some of the concerns that you might have with going from 39 to 60 days on average?
Well, yes, ma'am, I can tell you that we are aware of this issue, and that's one of the things as the Chief of the National Guard Bureau that I track closely, is I worry about the business model of the National Guard, which means our soldiers and airmen have a civilian life and a military life. And if I lose support from the soldier or airman to support both of those lives, if he is forced to make a choice, or she is forced to make a choice, then I know which one they will pick, and most likely I will lose that soldier or that airman. So what we are trying to do, as you are aware, is yes, it is true that the Armor Brigade combat teams will require more training to be ready should the United States Army need them to fight in any of the various scenarios where they will be. I will tell you that some of this transformation has already happened in terms of the Army Force Generation model previously has been, for several years now, a graduated increase in the training requirements as the brigade progresses through its training cycle just before it's available to be deployed. And that's not new. What is new is that the United States Army has decided to increase the training available to the brigade combat teams. We are going to go from 2 combat training center rotations a year to 4 combat training centers a year. In my estimation, that's a good thing in that it's going to make this operational Army National Guard more valuable to the country, more valuable to the Army, and more ready such that it can be ready quicker should it go out the door. To your point about how are we going to monitor them, well, I think that this is a leadership issue. This is something where we have to watch the people, personal engagement on my part, on the Adjutant General's part, on the Commander's part, with making sure that the schedules that we give these soldiers are predictable, that we let the employers know that you can count on these soldiers, and that these increased training times actually result in a deployment for the soldiers at the end. Otherwise, there won't be seen as a reason why should an employer endure the extended time away from their jobs if at the end of that training period they don't use them. So as we're going through this now, the plan is for the Army to use these forces and deploy them. This is the first cycle of this. And some people have decided that they have to change. They can't support it, and they will change MOSs and go someplace else. I lived this in the Air National Guard myself as a guardsman in the mid-90s when we began to deploy regularly, and it definitely changes the paradigm. So there'll be a change as this goes forward. And we're going to have to work with the employers and the members to the max extent possible so that we don't lose them.
Well, thank you for your answer, and I'm taking it in the spirit in which I think you totally meant it, but I'm going to put a cautionary tale on it. This just isn't about leadership to put up and to be quiet about it. This is also about leadership to see if we need to go back and review and figure out how these folks are not only trained but deployed in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Emeritus Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome, General, to these premises. Let me ask you, the Guard has that dual responsibility, one to the state of their location, the governor, and of course then the combatant commands on the federal level. The previous administration proposed cuts, continued cuts to Guard end strength, but our 017 bill reverse those cuts to end strength and will add 1,000 Army Guard troops above the 016 level. Tell us how you're going to utilize that extra manpower.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So that is true, and we're happy to see that the reduction in end strength stop for the Army National Guard. Because of the two missions we have, when force structure leaves our states, it's a double hit. It's a hit against the federal mission, and it's a hit against the ability to do our homeland mission. So our plan is to take the additional manpower that we have. If you recall, we were on a glide path to 335,000 force structure inside the Army, the National Guard. It stopped at 342 last year, and we were able to grow it back 1,000 to 343 this year. Our intent is to take that additional manpower, and as I talked about on the 5 brigade combat teams, is we're going to place it against and increase the readiness of these high-demand, operationally deploying units that will make them more ready, be able to get ready quicker, and train as they go. One of the concerns, frankly, of the increased manpower is we got the people back, but we didn't get the increased full-time support back with it. We got the part-time soldiers back, but not. We took the full-timers out all the way down to 335. We built the Army Guard back up to 343, but they were part-time billets and not full-time billets, and that hurts our ability to generate the force quickly and keep it ready and minimize the time it takes to get it ready to go out the door.
In my state, and I suspect I speak for all states when I say this, that we've got a tremendous, incredible drug problem. And in my area, the Guard has had a great program to eradicate marijuana in the remote hills of Appalachia, where it's apparently a very great climate for the growth of marijuana. But that Guard unit has just been tremendous. In joint support operations, they've eradicated 13 million marijuana plants. They've seized tons of marijuana, illegal weapons, and so forth, all to the tune of $25 billion. And we're seeing now across the country an effort apparently to make marijuana legal. But in the hills of Kentucky, and I've been on a couple of these missions where they fly into a very remote area of mountains, no homes or properties of any kind. Mainly, the marijuana is grown under high-tension electric wires right of way. Number one, you can't prove who owns it. Number two, you can't get there with a helicopter because of the electric lines and the like. And the troopers have to rappel down a rope, cut the marijuana, put it in a big bag, put it over their shoulder, and they're picked up by the helicopter and carried 50 miles, dangling 100 feet from below a helicopter. Very dangerous work, but very productive. Do you see that continuing, and what can we do to help you see that?
Well, first let me thank this committee for the $234 million we got in this year's appropriation for the counter-drug program. That counter-drug program, as you said, sir, is incredibly important, I believe, to leverage the skill sets that we have in the National Guard to facilitate and work with law enforcement to detect, disrupt, curtail illegal drug activities in every state. As you mentioned, the state of Kentucky has an issue with marijuana. And I think that, as you look across the nation, every state's program is tailored for the individual requirements that they have inside their state. And that's the way it should be. So as we look at the disbursement of the $234 million, we have what's called the threat-based resource model, which has about 70 different factors. It allows each state to prioritize what's important to them, such that when they come into the pool, their particular problem gets resourced, and then the states use those funds and develops their own plan, and in your case, sir, it's the eradication of marijuana inside Kentucky. And so I want to be able to continue to support that. I want to thank this committee for the continued funding of that program. Your funding of that program has enabled not only a robust liaison with law enforcement, but the schooling, the 5 additional schools that are funded, has allowed us to build additional capacity to fight this drug issue, whether it's marijuana or opioids or heroin or synthetics. And we all know the significant toll that is taken on our country across the nation. So
you mentioned opioids. My area was ground zero 14 years ago at the outset of the OxyContin rage that raged across the country. But these marijuana growers frequently are the dealers in opioids. And it's a double whammy with the money that we put into the anti-marijuana program, because it does bring in additional breakers of the law. Well, we appreciate your service, sir.
thank you, sir.
Mr. Ruppersberger.
Well, thank you for being here, and also we do appreciate your service and what you do in our hometowns, and also what you're doing in fight the war with ISIS and the other issues we deal with. I come from local government, so many times with storms and hurricanes, the National Guard has been there. And I also want to get a little local, but I want to acknowledge the Adjutant General Linda Singh, who's doing a great job in Maryland as heading that area. But as you know, the National Guard also plays a critical role in deterring Russia's aggression. I was just in Estonia about 3 weeks ago, and Maryland National Guard has about 500 members there right now that are working on the cyber capability and helping Estonia deal with the Russian aggression and Russian hacks and those type of things. And when we met, I think a couple months ago, you said it was critical that Russia must respect the frontline National Guard combat unit as well as the full-time. And do you believe at this point that Russia sees the National Guard units in a strength position? Where do you feel we are at this point? Or are there additional capabilities that this committee needs to help fund to get you to that level? And then I'd also, if you have time, I think we do, I want to talk, if you can talk a little bit about that Maryland National Guard in Estonia and what their mission is and what they're doing and what's the future there.
Congressman, I think when the Russians look across in Estonia or anywhere else in uniform and they see men and women in the Army wearing an Army uniform, they see the United States Army. That's what I think they see. And I think that's thanks in many ways to this committee. It's in thanks to 15 years or more now of continuous deployments, of integration of Army National Guard formations with active component formations, of a total force policy from General Milley and those who on his staff that support this associate unit pilot program that is training our brigades with the active Army brigades, aligning their formations so that we can train together and fight together. And I do think that everywhere I go, I was in the Sinai Peninsula this past week. I saw the swap out of a infantry brigade from Minnesota National Guard to the Massachusetts National Guard in the Sinai for the multinational force and observer mission. And I can tell you that they see no difference when they look across and they see whether it's combat maneuver forces or whether it's combat support forces, or they're wearing the United States Army uniform, and there is one training standard for the Army. And the National Guard doesn't have a different one. The National Guard will train, will deploy, will be ready at the same training standard as the United States Army, and that's what I think Russia sees. On the second part of your question, Estonia, the state partnership program, and again, thanks for the significant amounts of plus-ups you gave us for this year. I believe we got an additional $9 million added to the program from this committee that enables the engagements we have. The cyber relationship with Estonia and their Cyber Center of Excellence over there is a model for programs around the globe. That engagement since 1993, they were among the first 3 programs that started in the Baltics with us there. That ability to assure our allies of the United States commitment to the region That ability to train together with the forces in the region have had a strategic impact on our ability to assure and strengthen the NATO alliance. And I think that my thanks to Linda Singh, who's been a great supporter of that, state of Maryland, and everyone else who's part of that.
You know, Estonia is only 120 miles from Russia, and Putin's continuing to threaten them. And they had one of the severe attacks, and as a country, they only have close to 1 million people. They decided they were going to take on Russia, and with our help, the United States' help, and working with them, they've become pretty sophisticated, I think, from all the countries in that region, dealing with the Russian aggression and trying to counter the Russian attacks and cyber attacks.
Absolutely.
Okay, Leo back.
Thank you. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning, General Lengyel. Thank you for appearing before the committee. And thank you for your dedicated service to our great nation, especially on the eve of honoring those who sacrificed everything in the service of our country this coming Memorial Day. Readiness is the most dangerous limiting factor across all branches of our military, ranging from the timely training of personnel to aging aircraft. Congress, as you're aware, has appropriated additional funds for Army aircraft procurement, specifically for Black Hawk helicopters. In FY 2017, Congress provided the Army National Guard with 15 additional Black Hawks. As you may know, my home state of California is one of the country's most active emergency response forces, and its primary workhorse for aerial support is the Black Hawk helicopter. California flies one of the oldest fleets of Black Hawks in the country. 65% of them were built before 1990. In 2015, only 55% of the state's Black Hawk fleet was operational at any given time. Please explain to us your current modernization and recapitalization strategy for allocating these aircraft and those projected in FY 18 and 19. When do you expect states to receive the first of these additional aircraft?
Yes, sir. Thank you, and to this committee for the funding for the 15 Blackhawks. I think that you know, as we do with all our dispersion of equipment and recapitalization and modernization decisions, we look across the enterprise and see where it best makes sense to recapitalize the fleet at the time. I'm not exactly sure yet when those Blackhawks are going to get delivered. I think that will make a case to determine when we get them. We'll look at things like readiness of the fleet, maintenance statistics of the fleet, the sustainment levels of the fleet, potential deployments and utilization of those for our three missions, warfight, homeland, and partnerships. And at the time, work with the Army National Guard to determine where it's best to deploy those additional 15 Blackhawks. That's how we look at every stationing of all equipment, sir. And I thank you for your support of getting those Blackhawks.
Well, I hope in that process you think of good old California.
Absolutely.
As part of that
Yes,
process.
sir.
I carry on with Chairman Rogers' line of questioning. Combating terrorism and protecting our national interests abroad is only a part of the Guard's expansive mission. Protecting the homeland through the counter-drug operation is a vital mission I know that you take very seriously. In my area and throughout the United States, what are you seeing from these drug cartels, and do you see any association or collaboration between cartels and terrorist organizations?
So, sir, I think the consensus is that they are one and the same. I think that the money from the drug cartels is part and parcel to terrorist organizations, and counter terrorist organizations, counter transnational criminal organizations are all networked and aligned and work against the security of the.
Do you see any collaboration outside of organizations in South America, or are there organizations outside of South America involved in the drug activities within?
It's a global network, no question. It's not limited to South America. The funding streams, part of the things that the National Guard provides is counter-threat finance analysis. We train people who do this kinds of analysis in great detail, and it's clear that funding streams and these networks are not limited, not geographically limited. They are global in their nature, no question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Cuellar.
Madam Chair, and again, thank you for your service. A couple things. There were some of us that pushed for two items. One was the $1 million more to the National Guard State Partnership Program from 8 to 9. Like to get your thoughts, what you're looking at doing with that extra money. And then the other item was the FY, I think FY for the counter-drug program was 192, and some of us pushed it to 234 million. So like to get your quick thoughts on those, and then I want to ask you a question about Operation Felix.
Yes, sir. Thank you. As I mentioned, the state partnership program, and thanks to your funding, has it's an incredible tool, strategic tool for the Department of Defense, for the country, for our states. And the 234 million. My only worry is we got it so late in the year. I don't know. I'm worried that getting the money this late will be difficult for us to execute some of it, because, as you know, we have to posture in the SPP troops and people to go and events and work with host nation countries, and some of these things take time to develop.
Yeah, and if it's, and we understand, yeah.
Yeah, but clearly, we can spend every bit of money you give us for the state partnership program, given lead time to spend it. And same thing for the counter-drug program. There is no shortage of requirements or asks from law enforcement agencies for what we do and across the program. So absolutely, thank you for the increased
If you
funding.
want to just share with the committee and ourselves later on what your plans are, I like to do that. I know that the last time we were with Chairman Rogers and Mr. Womack, we went down to South America, and there's some partnerships out there. Chile has one with Texas, and you have other states also. Do y'all have anything with Mexico? I know we've been trying to do something with Mexico. If we can help you, it only makes sense that our largest neighbor, or at least to the south, is one. So if we can help you on that, let me just say that we can follow up. But I do want to ask you about Operation Felix. I know that Chairman Carter and Governor Abbott and I have been working on. As you know, when you have Border Patrol and they're doing night operations, the Air Marine, with all due respect, are not. They do it during the day. They don't want to go out at nighttime. But you still have Border Patrol. They're going out there. And you got to have something at nighttime. And unfortunately, some of our Air Marine folks, and we can address this later, but they don't go after 5 o'clock. And now they're trying to move away from the border, trying to set up, like they have a base in Laredo and they want to move to San Antonio. They want to be away from the border, which is counterintuitive. But the National Guard has done a heck of a job. We added some money, the leadership of John Carter and other folks. We added some money for Operation Felix, but what happened was that the Homeland Secretary, the previous Homeland Secretary, even though the money was there, they never asked. Then they sent this little letter that really didn't mean anything. It was a feel-good letter, and we're hoping. Then we contacted the new Secretary of Homeland, and his people are not familiar with it. You're familiar with it. We would ask you to get a hold of the new Secretary's office, and I believe the money is there. And whatever y'all can do, because we got to give our men and women, the Border Patrol, support at nighttime. And it's unfair that they are out there in the night and there's no aerial support for them. So like to, my time, I got about a minute and a half, so, but if you can finish on that thought, we really, some of us, including Governor Abbott and ourselves, are big supporters of this.
Sir, I thank you for the 19 million for Operation Phalanx, and I have already spoken to Secretary Kelly. I went to his office and I met with him, and I told him about my recent trip to the southwest border. McCollum was one place I went, and also in Nogales in Arizona at the request of Senator McCain to see the southwest border. And I saw firsthand the need, the requirement for additional air support to the folks who are on the border, the Customs and Border Protection agents who are there. And I rode in an Army National Guard helicopter at night, flying as part of the counter-drug program with a Customs and Border Protection agent in the helicopter. And I must share with the committee, it was not much different than what you see on TV for taking down a spot in Afghanistan. There weren't bullets and things flying along, but there were squirters, there were people running, there were police officers trying to apprehend them. And it is absolutely useful. So I commit to go back to Secretary Kelly, and I already have, and provided his staff a briefing on capability we can provide.
Can you, I know John Carter and other folks are interested, but if you can keep us informed, we really would appreciate it. Thank you for your time. My time's up. I yield
Yes,
back
sir.
the ball.
Mr. Womack.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to General Lengyel for his leadership and the work of our National Guard, both in on the Army and air side. Great questions coming from my colleagues today, talking about things like border patrol, security, counter-drug, operational tempo, Blackhawks, and those kinds of things. I'm going to open a line of questioning about what I consider to be the single biggest issue facing our Guard today, and that is in relation to full-time manning. It is not a sexy subject, but it is a critical subject if we're going to continue to utilize our National Guard, as we should, as an operational force. As an example, and you correct me if I'm wrong, when we were doing the drawdown on end strength, the Army Guard was scheduled to go to a number, and we were on the glide path to get to that number, and proportionately, full-time manning was cut based on that number. And then when this Congress gives money back to the Guard for end strength, and we increase that end strength, not increased was the proportionate loss of the full-time manning. That is insane that we would allow this to happen. So my question for you, General Lengyel, is how has this happened, and what is this doing to impact the readiness of a critical operational force for our military, our National Guard? Take all the time you need.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for that question. And so our business model in the National Guard is different. I am a protector of that business model. I don't want to look like the United States Army. I do not want to look like the United States Air Force. We need to remain a preponderantly part-time force. That is the value in it for this country and for what we do. The United States Air National Guard is about 35% full-time. In its 100,000 people, 105,000, it's about 35% full-time. In the Army National Guard, 343,000 people, we are about 16% full-time. What that full-time force does, and the only reason we have them, and the only reason I am here before you today, is to make ready for the United States Army, United States Air Force, and the governors in our states, it is to make ready that force, to be ready, to be manned, to be trained, to be equipped, so that we can do the missions. That's why we have full-time people in the Army National Guard. So you need to understand why they were gone. Money. I understand why they are gone, why the Army, why we took them. We had incredible bills to pay. In our budgets, that's where all our money is. Our money is in that small chunk of change, $16 billion in the Army Guard. 2/3 of that is people. Most of that is people. Same thing for the Air National Guard. So that's why it went. We had bills to pay in sequestration and drawdowns in budgets. But what this force does is it prepares the force so that when they come to drill for the 39 days or the 45 days or the 60 days, they have the structure to do the collective training they need to do their wartime tasking. They make sure that the equipment that they need to train on, the tanks and the Bradleys, that they work, that the aircraft are flyable, so that when the people come in, they can fly not only together, but they can fly in collective training, and they can do the kinds of training that the Army needs them to do. Same thing, for the Air Force side. So the full-time support piece is what enables us to make the Army National Guard ready quicker. They come in and they prepare for a military unit training assembly for people to come in for a drill. When they put them together for 3 and 4 days at a time so that they can do some more training, they build the battlefield. They build the command post. They build everything so the soldiers come in, they get out of their pickup truck, and they walk into the field, and they train. And so without the full-time support, then they waste time. They have to come in, they have to build the battlefield, they have to train, they have to fix the equipment so they can fly it. It is incredibly important. I'm not looking for huge numbers of and by the way, I'm looking at my staff, NGB. Where do we have full-time people right now that if I could put some back out into the fields so that they can help make the operational force more ready. And I would tell you that I think if we're going to be ready quicker, stay in operational force, we're going to have to slowly increase the percentage of full-time support in the Army National Guard.
Thank you. Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me associate myself with all of my colleagues' remarks since I've been here. I agree they've asked some great questions. First, thank you. Obviously, Ohio is a huge part of the team and have deployed and will continue to deploy around the globe. And we know that post 9/11 use of the Guard has been a big part of our plan. One of the things I'm concerned with is making sure that we're providing the benefits that match the service our National Guard are providing. And I understand there are significant differences in the benefits provided to our National Guard based upon minor administrative coding orders. And I'll give you an example. I've co-sponsored the bipartisan Reserve Component Benefits Parity Act designed to ensure National Guard who are activated in administrative codes such as 12304A and 12304B of Title 10 U.S. Code are treated in the same manner as other active duty orders for determining veterans' benefits. This issue and many like it were documented in the October 1st, 2014 Reserve Forces Policy Board Memorandum, and yet we are still struggling to make sure that our National Guard and Reserve get the correct benefits that they have earned. So what have we done to focus on educating our National Guard and Reserve on the differences administrative coding can make in veteran benefits? And how is your leadership making every effort to correctly reflect the importance of military service of our National Guard and Reserve by using the appropriate coding so their service counts towards their earned benefits?
Sir, I think this is one of the more important issues that we need to fix going forward is the benefits, the parity of benefits for our service. I'm thankful for the Parity Act. I completely think it's the right thing to do. 12304 Bravo was a flexible mobilization authority given to the service secretaries, which has enabled access, mobilization of the force. However, when they created it, funding numbers being what they were, they didn't attach all the entitlements that go with it. So the soldiers who are in the Sinai, who I just spoke to, they want this fixed. They want.
How are we coming with it? I mean, we're getting calls on this, and this is obviously a pocketbook issue for so many. Are we making some progress on this, or?
Well, I mean, the awareness that thing has got is we've got to fix it here. I mean, I think that we've got to find the resources to put against it so that there's no difference, so that they are entitled to health care beyond 180 days when they come back, so that they are entitled to post 9/11 GI Bill education benefits, so that they have access to early retirement as per other mobilization authorities. So what my soldiers are doing, what the soldiers from the states are doing is they are changing their mobilization authority to voluntary status, which doesn't give them the protections of the dwell periods that we talked about early with Congresswoman McCollum. That is, they are voluntarily giving up their rights to serve their employers and their families and give themselves their dwell period as citizens so that they can get the health benefits and retirement benefits that they deserve. So I ask for your continued support here. That it is a important issue that needs to be fixed. I think that the commission that was established a couple of years ago, the McCormick Commission. I'm sorry, I can't spit out that acronym for you. Exactly what it is. The one
You got
that
a
looked
few
at
kicking around in your head, I know.
retirement benefits and duty status reform. OSD is actually working on the behalf of all of the reserve components, not just National Guard, to streamline and make right the entitlements that go with pay and duty status, like service equals like pay and benefits. So I do sense inside the department at least, there is a push to make that happen and a push to make the reform. There will be a bill with it to do it, but it's the right thing to do.
Well, we need you to continue to push us, and we'll push you, and hopefully make some progress. Real quick, as I only have 30-some seconds, I know Chairman brought up earlier the opiate drug issue. Are you starting to make a distinction in prioritization of opiates versus marijuana, because the problem is so big. Are you prioritizing how you're deploying your
So-
resources, I guess I should say?
So because of the rise and the devastating effects of the opiate piece, it has taken on a more important role in the threat-based resource model. That team has come together, which is adjutant generals from the states. It's academic institutions who study this. It is subject matter experts who come together. There used to be only 20 variables per state because I said earlier, every state has a unique and distinct environment that threatens their state. So we need a model that is flexible so that each state can articulate it. And so the opioid issue has risen inside that threat-based resource model, and we'll apply the right authority to it.
Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. General Lengyel, welcome a fellow Texan. I want to thank my friend, Mr. Cuellar, for raising the issue on the border, and I associate myself with all the conversation we've had today. General, our Associated Pilot Program, Associated Units Pilot Program, high-demand National Guard units see more training days and combat training center rotations as part of the Army's Associated Units Pilot Program. We've talked about that a little bit. The Army requires training together to increase the readiness across all three components and keep up the demand for soldiers around the world. Can you provide the committee with an assessment of the Associated Pilots Program to date, and if you feel like you're meeting the accomplishments that you are seeking to meet? Are there any additional funding requirements that you feel like we should know about as we go forward? And I'm reading a book called Fast Tanks and Heavy Bombers that General Milley gave me. And I would venture to say that the National Guard trains more than the regular Army did. Today we train more than the regular Army did during this period of time between World War I and World War II. And that's an amazing change in the Guard's requirements. So would you tell us a little bit about that?
I would, sir. I am thankful for the commission and their recommendations that came up with the Associated Unit Program. It is a test, and I'm thankful that General Milley has embraced it. And by all counts so far, I'm willing to say that from every indication I have, it's a success. It has been embraced by the Army. It has been embraced by the Army National Guard. It has resulted in people swapping unit patches and becoming part of each other's uniform. It is a fundamental cultural change of integrating the United States Army, or Air National Guard, into the United States Army. And I think only good things will come from it. Time will tell. I mean, we will look at the end of this and we will determine, has our readiness increased? I'll tell you what is increasing, the trust in each other, the ability and awareness of the commanders, the sharing of resources and training, the utilization of our force. Everything has gotten better since we have become this operational force, and I believe the Army Unit Pilot Program, the Association Unit, is nothing but good. I think that's incredible. With respect to how we train, with respect to, I couldn't be more impressed. I mean, I've spent the last 5 years of my life learning about the United States Army and Army National Guard and how we train. It is an amazing undertaking to train a brigade combat team. It is logistically complex to amass the forces and equipment and training that you need in the right places where you can actually use them and train on them. It takes an immense amount of coordination, and quite frankly, it's expensive. But to use, where we save the money is the 27 brigades that we have in the Army National Guard. Save you a little money when they're not training. We cost the same when you use us, we cost the same when you train us, but when you're not going, when they're not using us, we save some money. And so it is my job, I think. You don't want 27 brigades in the Army National Guard at C1. That's not where you save money, because you will spoil that readiness before you use it. So we want to meter that readiness. We want to make them ready faster. General Milley needs us inside of 60 days, inside of 90 days if something happens in North Korea. We have to look hard at our business models. We have to look hard at the mobilization process. How do we mobilize? How can we mobilize faster? I think that's what General Milley.
Are we being hacked?
Yeah, we're
No,
getting
I
hacked.
don't have, my phone's in my back pocket.
So I think that's what we're trying to do in the Army National Guard Service, is make that force ready quicker, modernize it, have the same equipment, and be ready to participate as part of the Army as fast as they need us.
Thank you. We're very proud of you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Roby.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, sir, for being here. It's great to see you again. I have a few questions, but first, a few comments. As you know, the site survey team is in Montgomery right now with the 187th Fighter Wing and at Danley Field for the future fielding of the F-35. And as a long supporter of the F-35 program, it's exciting to see how much progress the program has made. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to say to you that if there are any questions from the Guard for the community or for any member of the Alabama delegation, we continue to make ourselves available to you. The Alabama delegation, of course, in the community in our state is so excited about this possibility. In your testimony, you highlight the numerous deployments that the Guard has performed since 9/11 and the fact that the operations tempo today remains very high. And so I want to thank you and all members of the National Guard for your selfless service in protecting the nation in these challenging times and the sacrifice of your families. I'm concerned, however, and have recently had some conversations with friends of mine who serve about how sustainable current operation tempo is and what has been brought to my attention as it relates to dwell time. We've placed a huge burden on our Guard families and not to mention their employers. The question I have, are we placing too much on the Guard to constantly be an operational partner? And I've heard the comments of my colleagues in here, and I listen to you as well. But when my phone rings and it's a member of the Guard who has served both in the active, for many years in the active component and now as a pilot in the Guard, and what's being communicated to me is that there is concern by those who continue to serve their country, hearing these rumors about a decrease in the dwell time from 5 to 1 to 4 to 1, and then is that a slippery slope? So I just really wanted for you to take an opportunity to address these concerns that I've heard, and I'm sure others have as well.
Yes, ma'am, the concerns are real. I think you probably heard from the fellow Joint Chiefs yesterday that the threats that the country is facing is absolutely going to require the continued operational use of the National Guard. One of the things that you're seeing in Alabama, particularly in the 135 arena, the KC-135 arena, because of all of these issues that we're dealing with are far away, and they require a lot of air refueling capability. For the past 15 years, the Air Force has had the good fortune to have pretty much a downturn in the airline cycle, in which they had pilots available and willing to work who were either waiting or not engaged in an airline job. And so the volunteerism of people who are able to deploy beyond normal mobilized deployments was high. So what's happened now is the availability, the airline industry is booming. They have a large draw on our pilot force who are now fully engaged in a civilian job, and so that volunteerism is beginning to be harder to get. You have to keep in mind what our units are funded to do. So there are areas that are being stressed on the utilization, and I would tell you that KC-135s are one of them. Writ large across the force, we are using, as I mentioned in my remarks opening statement, 18,000 men and women deployed right now today. If you go back 10 years ago, we had 70,000 men and women deployed today, and an average of that for over 10 years. So I characterize the sustainability of our force, the utilization of our force right now, as a normal walk, maybe a brisk walk. Whereas 10 years ago, 2005, with 100,000 people deployed, plus 50,000 doing Hurricane Katrina, that was a full-out sprint, and that would not have been sustainable. Overall, writ large across the force, we can sustain what we're doing today. But we have to be careful and look at specific threatened areas like KC-135s and work to do that. And maybe associations can help. Maybe we can put additional active pilots in there and they can take on some of those flying responsibilities.
Well, I mean, I certainly don't claim to have the solution, and that's why I wanted to just bring it to your attention and continue to have this conversation. You know, these men and women are there because they want to be there and because they love their country. And I know we all recognize that, but I do appreciate your commitment to them, and I'd like to continue to have this conversation with you down the road.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks again.
Mr. Wislowski.
Thank you very much. A couple of statements. First of all, General, there's a series of questions for the record on the tactical wheeled vehicle strategy for the Guard, and certainly attach importance to that program, and we'll be interested in the Guard's response. Would join with a number of my colleagues who have mentioned the counter-drug program, very important in our state, particularly important in my congressional district, and do appreciate the Guard's work with the local communities. Also, and has been talked about, the Partnership Act. I think it's a very enriching program for the Guard, for our country, for the other countries we are involved with. Very proud again that our state now has 2 such partnerships. Was interested in the interchange you had with Mr. Ryan, and will be interested in the Guard following up on his question. Some years ago, asked in a different fashion the same question. Some years ago, the Guard said they were working on it. So would hope that some progress is being made. For the questions I have, there's been mention of the Guard's responsibility for Homeland Security, for responses to natural disasters. You just mentioned Katrina. As far as equipment in the Guard, as far as training of the Guard, when you do have a hurricane, it could be in Florida, it could be a tornado in a Midwestern state, wildfire, are there particular types of training programs that we should be attuned to that may not be fully funded? Are there types of equipment for some of these natural disasters that Guard units across our country may not have adequate resources for? We're always thinking of overseas deployment, homeland protection, but there's that natural disaster. Is there something we're missing here as far as the needs that you and the Guard have?
Sir, thank you. You know, I think one thing I would point out is thanks for the INGREA money that we get that allows us to do buy some of the equipment that we use specifically for the homeland. Communication stuff, engineer stuff, modernize our aviation fleet with things that help us do our homeland mission. A lot of that is done for and used by the INGREA account. The money that we get in the counter-drug program to have the schools and to train our service members to be value-added for that helps us, and I consider the counter-drug a huge part of the Homeland Security mission and support mission that we do. I don't have a specific additional ask for you. I would tell you that we are looking right now at our cyber training requirements. And although I'll say for the most part our cyber training schools are on track, the money that this committee gives us, I think we got $12 million this year for the Army National Guard to fund the positions that allow us to build and grow out our cyber network. We wouldn't be able to do that without the money. Although the training is validated by the Army, it is not yet funded. It's straight in our baseline budget. So without the funding that we get from this committee, we wouldn't be able to complete those kinds of trainings things. So I'll give you a more direct list, but those are the things that come to mind as I sit here right now.
And as far as natural disasters, there's nothing that comes to mind that we're missing as far as resources. Okay. Thank you very much, John. Thank you.
General Lengyel, thank you for your time and your attention to this committee's concern. This will conclude Panel 1. We'll now move to Panel 2, the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force Reserves, and I would encourage all members to please stay for this panel. We're going to break for just 3 minutes to change the panels.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
They have testing, 1, 2, 3, test.
you'll be seated, please. Our second panel this morning consists of leaders of the reserve components. Lieutenant General Charles Luckey, Chief of the Army Reserve, Vice Admiral Luke McCollum, Chief of the Navy Reserve, Lieutenant General Rex McMillan, Commander, Marine Corps Reserve, and Lieutenant General Maryanne Miller, Chief of the Air Force Reserve. We're pleased to welcome these four very distinguished general officers as witnesses today, and the subcommittee thanks each of you for your service. As I mentioned in my opening remarks for the first panel, this country relies now, perhaps more than ever, upon the service of your soldiers, sailors, and airmen to ensure mission success. The committee commends the reserve components for their dedication to service and to our nation. We look forward to your testimony and your insight, but first I'd like to call on the ranking member, my friend Pete Visklosky, for his comments.
Madam Chair, appreciate again that you're holding this hearing, and appreciate the panel before us for your testimony and your service, and I look forward to hearing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Generals, please proceed with your testimony. Your full written testimony will be placed in the record. Please summarize your oral statement so we can leave enough time to get to everyone's questions.
Chairwoman Granger, Vice Chairman Visklosky, distinguished members of the committee, I'll keep my remarks brief as the chairman just requested, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning. It's an awesome opportunity and an honor for me to represent the 200,000 soldiers of America's Army Reserve who are serving today across 20 time zones and around the globe. On behalf of them, their families, the employers of America, and the Department of Army civilians who support us, I want to thank each of you for your unwavering support and commitment to this team. As I noted in my posture statement, which has been filed with the committee, as a leader of this team, I'm well attuned to the persistent presence of the asymmetric threat of terrorism and radical groups, as well as the emerging and compelling challenges presented by near-peer competitors, potential adversaries with the capability, propensity, and willingness to contest American power in all domains. We have not faced these conditions for over a quarter of a century, and the Army Reserve must take action along with the rest of our Army to meet the new and evolving threats. In this environment, an operational reality where the lethality and the complexity of the battle space presents new challenges to our Army, America's Army Reserve's practice of building rotational readiness in units over time will no longer be sufficient. We must prepare some units for full spectrum operational environment immediately. This includes making ready significant portions of our team able to go fast, in some cases in days or weeks, in order to immediately complement and augment the active component formations who rely on America's Army Reserve to fight and win on the battlefield from the first round downrange. In this new threat paradigm, some 300 units of action, or approximately 30,000 soldiers, need to be able to deploy into harm's way in less than 90 days, many in less than 30. I refer to this force as Ready Force X. It is a fast-deploying set of capabilities, which I'll be happy to discuss with the committee in more detail. We need to deliver these units with the mobility, survivability, connectivity, and lethality needed to win on the modern battlefield. As always, consistent and predictable funding for essential training, equipping, and modernization is crucial to our success. The degree of funding which the committee has afforded us in the past and continues to is of tremendous benefit to America's Army Reserve. It's a superb tool which, in accordance with your guidance, enables me to procure certain high-priority capabilities that can be used for both combat operations and as appropriate domestic response operations. I thank you for your continued support in this regard. Let there be no doubt that my team's #1 priority is readiness. In fact, as I testify today, America's Army Reserve has just completed the largest crew-served weapons gunnery operation in its history, Operation Cold Steel, conducted up at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. There, we rapidly accelerated the training and qualification of our master gunners, of our vehicle crew evaluators, and individual soldiers, while reinvigorating the non-commissioned officers corps of America's Army Reserve, which, as you all well know, is the first line, if you will, the core role in our Army of training and leading our soldiers when the lead hits the air. This is money and time well spent and much needed as we move into the future, and I appreciate this committee's support in that regard. As for the future, America's Army Reserve is uniquely postured and empowered to leverage the wide-ranging reservoir of professional talent to understand, develop, and exploit emerging commercial markets and cutting-edge technologies by partnering with private industry in order to stay on pace in a very dynamic world. Working closely with Defense Innovation Experimental Unit here in Washington, D.C. and spread around the country, as well as Military District 5 over at National Defense University and other partners, we are well on the way to strengthening linkages between the private sector and America's Army. I want to reiterate the message I shared with the American people in closing. I shared this with them on the Army Reserve's 109th birthday last month in Times Square, joining that stage, if you will, with the Army's Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year, who, by the way, happens to be an Army Reserve soldier from the Golden State, California. My team relies, as I told the American people, on our families, on the commitment to support them, and the persistent willingness of America's employers to share their finest talent with us in working the delicate balance between being ready enough to be relevant, but not so ready that my soldiers can't maintain good, rewarding civilian employment. As I reach out to the influencers across America and around the globe, I ask them and press them to act and to encourage their communities, cities, campuses, congressional districts, and the employers located therein to see themselves as full partners in national security, sharing America's best talent with us, America's Army Reserve, as we support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Distinguished members, your Army Reserve has always met the challenges of the time. With the committee's help, we will continue to provide the capabilities and readiness, live the example, and exude the ethos that the people of the United States expect and deserve. We will remain your premier team of skilled professionals serving the nation as both soldiers and engaged civilians around the globe. It's just who we are. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairwoman Granger, and distinguished and ranking member of Vislowski, and certainly the distinguished members of the subcommittee. It's a distinct honor to be here this morning to talk to you about the state of the Navy Reserve and talk to you about the Navy's fiscal year 2018 budget request. And probably more importantly, to report on the dedicated men and women of our reserved force. The Navy Reserve is the busiest it has ever been. And as an integrated force with the active component, we are experiencing competition in the maritime environment. This environment, it's fast-paced, it's complex, it's ambiguous, and at times uncertain. And the demand signal for the reserve support has now exceeded over 79,000 individual mobilizations around the globe. And as you may know, these individuals, our sailors, have left their civilian jobs for sometimes up to a year, and their families as well. In addition to these mobilizations that I referenced, we have about 20% of the force that's engaged day-to-day in performing what we call operational support. The Naval Reserve works out of 123 operational support centers, and these support centers are across the 50 states, Puerto Rico, and Guam. And the force structure is the results of the Navy's imperative to optimize interoperability and operational effectiveness of the Navy. We spread our units around the country, beyond our fleet concentration areas, and this has allowed the Navy to retain valuable human capital and provides reservists a convenient place to train while remaining close to their businesses and their homes. One highly successful example of this strategy is the Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base in Fort Worth, Texas. And this facility alone is a model for inter-service cooperation and community support that achieves the readiness that I'm referring to. This installation hosts 40 tenant commands encompassing nearly 10,000 personnel across all 4 services. This is just one example of how the Navy Reserve is operating around the country in each of your districts. The FY 18 budget request is focused on restoring balance and wholeness and laying the foundation for future investments. This is both in our equipment and our people. And as an integrated force, the Navy knows that its heartbeat is its people. And this investment addresses reserve personnel wholeness in areas such as unmanned aircraft, cyber, shipyard maintenance, and tactical operations. While our Navy's Reserve continues to execute at extremely high levels, our hardware specifically our aging aircraft fleet, is facing some obsolescence challenges and rapidly approaching the end of its design service life. 16 years of hard use has accelerated this effort. Accordingly, aircraft recapitalization remains the Navy Reserve's top equipping priority. The FY18 budget request allows us to restore wholeness in aviation maintenance accounts, and it sets a solid foundation for next and future years' investments. And to continue restoring the wholeness of our force, we need stable, predictable funding mechanisms that allow us to plan effectively and react to contingencies. Additionally, your increased support for flexible funding authority for the NGRIA is needed. Providing us this authority as well as flexible funding methods enables the Navy Reserve to provide operational support where and when needed, and that will maximize the total effectiveness of the total force. While the challenges ahead of us are significant, I could not be more proud of our Navy Reserve Force. Every time I set foot in one of our operational reserve centers around the country, I come away, as you can imagine, very impressed with the dedication and the commitment of these sailors. And the pride that they take combining their civilian skill sets with their professional competence in military operations, I must admit, is very inspiring. So on behalf of the Navy and the Navy Reserve, I thank the members of the committee for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you.
Chairman Granger, Ranking Member Visklosky, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify on behalf of the Commandant of the Marine Corps about your Marine Corps Reserve. I'm honored to be here with my fellow Reserve component chiefs, and with me here today is my Force Sergeant Major, Sergeant Major Kimball. I've been at the helm of Marine Forces Reserve for a year and a half, and I'm pleased to inform you that your Marine Corps Reserve is thriving. On average, we are 95% manning, and our leadership, morale, and personnel health of the force is at unprecedented levels. I'm continually impressed by the professionalism, competence, dedication, and motivation of our Reserve Marines. Like their active duty brothers and sisters, they serve selflessly to protect our nation while at the same time balancing their civilian careers and their families. The strength of Marine Forces Reserve is the talent, skill, and discipline of our individual Marines and sailors. I am motivated by the most common question that I receive from your Reserve Marines, which is, when do we get to deploy? They maintain the same mindset as the active component Marine Corps. We're ready to fight tonight, and we're ready to respond to any mission. My primary focus remains being combat ready and having Reserve Marines and units capable of moving, shooting, and communicating across the battlefield. Reserve Marines are viewed the same and are expected to respond the same as our active duty counterparts on a moment's notice. We are integrated with the active component as part of the total force. We are expected to be a force that is fully complementary, seamless, and an equal teammate to the active component. We are manned, trained, and equipped to support Marine Corps operational requirements across the full range of military operations. We are 39,000 strong, formed into major commands that comprise a Marine Air Ground Task Force, and we are unofficially known as the 4th Marine Expeditionary Force. As the Commandant of the Marine Corps has said, we are one Marine Corps, a total force Marine Corps. To seamlessly integrate with the active component, Marine Forces Reserve must maintain equipment parity. Shortfalls in equipment modernization result in less interoperability with the active component, which slows the pace of operations and increases risk to your Marines and risk to mission accomplishment. Marine Forces Reserve continues to see shortfalls in modernization, like our most pressing shortfall, the KC-130J, which is used for tactical assault support, air-to-air and ground refueling, and combat logistic support. It is the major end item which facilitates moving to and across the battlefield. We should not send our Marines to a fight with legacy equipment. Transitions to modern equipment requires budget resources. NGRIA, as you are all familiar with, is a complement to the presidential budget. And while we greatly appreciate NGRIA, greater spending flexibility combined with a more representative funding proportion that is more aligned with our historical percentage would significantly contribute to the ability of Marine Forces Reserve to modernize legacy equipment, transition to new systems, improve our readiness, and better support our young Marines. We owe it to our nation's most precious assets, the young men and women in uniform, to send them into combat with the most modern equipment available. With the continued support of Congress, Marine Forces Reserve will continue to serve as a crucial operational and tactical shock absorber to the active component. In conclusion, I want to leave this distinguished body with two final thoughts. Number one, I want to personally thank you for passing the fiscal year 2017 Omnibus Appropriations Bill. And number two, having a predictable and consistent budget in the future will significantly improve readiness across the services. And number two, we need a flexible NAGRIA that complements the budget to assist your Marine Corps Reserve in funding major end items as defined by law. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairwoman Granger, Ranking Member Viscoski, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm honored to have with me this morning Command Chief Master Sergeant Erica Kelly. Together, we represent America's 69,000 reserve citizen airmen, providing operational capability and surge capacity, ensuring airspace and cyber dominance around the globe. 26 years of continuous global operations and decreased budgets have stressed our force, which is always in demand. Last year, we were the fourth largest major command contributor to combat operations, filling over 10,000 air expeditionary and volunteer taskings across the U.S. and in 30 foreign countries. Our airmen deliver critical capabilities to the fight every day through global vigilance, global reach, and global power. Your Air Force Reserve operates with 16,000 fewer airmen and 220 fewer aircraft than we did in Desert Storm. The stress of our size, the steady state operations tempo, and our funding shortfalls keep us challenged, but we remain a lethal, combat-ready force composed of amazing and resilient airmen and families. The concerns which weigh most in our day-to-day operations are insufficient manpower for both full-time support and critical skills, training availability and funding, weapons system sustainment, and concurrent fielding of aircraft and equipment. We continue to make incremental steps in the readiness needed for today's fight while posturing for the complex future threats and the many challenges. Although the FY18 President's budget request is a good beginning to ensure that we deliver the most ready, capable, and lethal force, a long-term effort is needed. This balance of readiness today and the needs of tomorrow is difficult without predictable, sustainable funding through the out years. The FY18 President's budget request continues our efforts to build readiness and capability by adding 800 positions across our rated space, cyber, and our ISR missions. The budget request, with the additional overseas contingency operations support, begins to fund weapons system sustainment closer to the required levels, ensuring that we can produce the exercise, training, and combat sorties needed to sustain the best Air Force in the world. Modernization and recapitalization are essential to maintaining our combat edge. With continued congressional support for the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Appropriation, we can smartly invest in weapon systems, which will increase our capability and recapitalize systems that will minimize risk against our emerging threats. And I thank you for the FY17 NAGRIA funding of $105 million, which provided all-weather targeting pods for the F-16, enabled KC-135 defensive systems, updated digital displays for platforms such as the A-10, and afforded personal recovery equipment for our PAVHawk helicopters. This funding helps ensure that we maintain that lethal edge to dominate and to survive on all spectrums of the conflict. Delivering combat air power to the joint force is our mission. To best execute this requirement, we must develop a concurrent fielding and divestment strategy to ensure operational parity with the active component. This ensures synchronized use of manpower, equipment, and training resources in a fiscally constrained environment. Over the past few decades, we have successfully adjusted to an operational reserve. Portions of our force are stressed, but our reserve citizen airmen are resilient, engaged, and honored to serve. We require your support for sufficient resources to meet full spectrum readiness, increase end strength to support integrated operations, and an increased budget to buy back the readiness deficit and modernize weapon systems. A stable, predictable budget will ensure our Air Force Reserve is combat ready at all times. Thank you again for your support and your opportunity, and this amazing opportunity to represent our airmen, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
For your testimony and for describing the service and the sacrifice and the needs of those that you represent here today. We'll be using a timer this morning. We're going to reduce the time for you to ask and answer questions to 3 minutes because of the size of the panel and the number of members who are here. And we have a hard end time at 12 o'clock. That will include questions and responses. If time permits, we'd have a second round, but I doubt that will happen. I'm going to call Mrs. McCollum first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to submit for the record a question on lodging in kind and what we can do to have our, especially in the Army Reserve, our soldiers not paying out of pocket for some of the training that they perform in. But I do have a question for, I think it affects all of you. I commend people who decide to continue in the reserves after their discharge. Sometimes it's a very heavy family discussion about whether or not people are going to stay in the reserves. And so people who do that do it with their eyes wide open about what a deployment could really be meaning for them. So when they come home as a citizen too. And this is a question I had with General Luckey, but I want to pose this to all of you. In many cases, soldiers and airmen are deployed with as little as 30 days notice, and that can put a lot of strain on family. So because they've been planning their lives moving forward, they don't have the same protection in their civilian jobs that sometimes, and I commend our businesses in Minnesota for what they do for our National Guard. But they have personal money invested. They're getting ready to close on homes. They might have paid tuition forward. What are we doing? What can we do to help you? What is your team doing to ensure that families of these soldiers and airmen, when they're given this short notice, that they don't find themselves in financial harm or with unexpected consequences with their employment when they come back home? Thank you.
So to the extent that the question was initially directed to me, I'll respond first. If
I figure you take one for the team.
So, as you well know, and I think we've discussed this before, part of the focus from a priority of work perspective, if you will, of America's Army Reserve is to make sure that we're tracking, if you will, or witting of which families and which units are most likely to be forced to do exactly what you just said, Congresswoman, which is move very quickly. This past weekend, I spent the better part of 2 days in Oklahoma City at what we call Family Programs University. It's an Army Reserve program to essentially bring in volunteers, family program coordinators, and family program facilitators from units, and particularly those units that are most likely to be called to go first. So I can't give you a complete comprehensive answer as it pertains necessarily to units located in eastern Minnesota. What I can tell you is the focus and the energy, if you will, of our efforts to make sure we have good, quality, engaged outreach, if you will, to families is particularly seized with the problem that you've just articulated. So I want you to know that I'm paying very close attention to that.
Thanks for that question. Just an additional thing I would add on to it. The greatest return on investment to the American taxpayer in the military for a transitioning military individuals if we can retain them into the reserve component. We don't have to train them. We can take advantage of the time they spend on active duty. So it certainly behooves us to maximize and create an environment that allows that reservist to thrive with their families, thrive with their civilian employers. And the way I would answer that question is predictability. Create a predictable environment with funding that we don't have a sustained period of long continuing resolutions, and that predictability allows a reservist with confidence that they know that they can plan there's going to be funding and it's funding available for the training to get ready to meet those commitments.
Ma'am, as you know, the Marine Corps is a force in readiness. We have to be ready to fight tonight. The Commandant depends very much on his reserve component to be ready on a moment's notice. The biggest thing that we do is express that out to our Marines and their families at every opportunity. To be prepared mentally, to be prepared physically, to know their MOS, to not waste 1 minute of their training time. We have 38 training days with them a year in order to prepare them to go downrange into combat. They have to be ready to fight tonight. We have a lot of history or examples throughout our history of having to get out the door very quickly inside of 30 days, 45 days, and directly into combat. Their families know that. They're prepared for it. They're leaning forward, and we ask them to reach out to their employers to make sure that they're aware of the commitment that they have to the United States Marine Corps and to the United States for the defense of this nation.
And for the Air Force Reserve, our response time is 72 hours. So for those longer-term deployments, we give the Air Force, we've done an amazing job over the last 26 years of getting that battle rhythm of reservists deploying downrange, and we'll give them 180 days notice to 270-day dose, and that's good for that. But every reservist knows they're on a 72-hour hook, and our systems support that. Our wing commanders support that. The Yellow Ribbon program supports that, and we're structured to support that.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thanks to the distinguished panel that's gathered in front of us. Because of a short time frame, I'll go to one question. Before I do, I want to take just a moment of personal privilege in welcoming the great Admiral over here, Mr. McCollum, who, before he took this particular job, was working at a small five and dime in northwest Arkansas that I represent, and the proud parent, I might also add, of a young son who's making his rounds in the Arkansas General Assembly and doing remarkable work, and we're really, really proud of him. I wanted to ask the panel if they would just take a moment and tell us what their top one or two issues are right now, and I will take out of those answers funding, because we know funding is the answer to a whole lot of problems that everybody has, so we'll just leave that off to the side. I don't know if it's op-tempo, I don't know if it's modernization, don't know if it's medical fitness, but in the reserves, you've got a different set of issues that affect you, and so just go from Army down the line. Give me the top two. What should this committee understand to be your top couple of issues?
So thank you for the question, and very simply, two things. One, being able to generate the formations that I need to generate on the timelines required to support the warfighter. Primarily focusing on two different theaters of operations, so the Pacific and Europe, and being able to generate, as I said in my opening remarks, capabilities on the orders of 10 to 15,000 soldiers in less than 45 days, up to 33,000 soldiers in about 90 days. So the units, if you will, incorporate those capabilities, and the soldiers in those units have to be at a very high degree of state of readiness. So my challenge, first of all, is to be able to identify those requirements, make sure that each one of those formations has the training, the equipping, the modernization, and the, if you will, mission command architecture to operate in a completely interoperable, efficacious fashion with active component formations very quickly. Inside that, I would say, is the number two thing is deployability of the individual soldiers, making sure that I'm affording every soldier the opportunity to get everything that they need done so that they are completely in a deployable status at the time that somebody needs them to go do a job. So that is a persistent, ongoing challenge for us, but we're getting after it.
Congressman, thank you for the question. So you won't allow us to use the word budget, but may I just use the word that what the budget does for us? It creates wholeness. Creating wholeness creates the ability to generate readiness. And at its core, the U.S. Navy is an integrated force, and the Navy Reserve is a component of that, relies on the help of Congress to give us the ability to be whole, to fix our what I'd say divots are that in our readiness accounts, our maintenance accounts. And by doing that, the second thing it does then is it then generates readiness to deploy when and where the American public chooses us to go.
Congressman, thank you for the question. I'll tell you what keeps me awake at night is readiness of the force, the reserve forces to fight tonight and be able to get out the door and seamlessly augment and reinforce the active component in a fist fight. The things that we need to do is investment in our future, modernization of our equipment, and then the maintenance of our legacy equipment. Those two things, and specifically transition to the KC-130T and the AH-1Z attack helicopter for the Marine Corps Reserves.
The two things I think that are most important for the Air Force Reserve are the critical skills manning, particularly our pilot shortage and our cyber professionals. On the cyber side, industry is just pulling them. We can attract them and we can train them, but we don't keep them that long. So your reserve and guard are the capacity that can keep them in uniform, which is great. The other piece is weapon sustainment and making sure that's vital to our readiness.
Yeah, sure.
So, sir, if I may answer the second question first, very briefly. So, in the main, I've been the money that's been given to us by the committee, and again, thank you for that. Basically, along the lines I articulated here earlier this morning. So, it's about mobility. So, some of this is platforms, if you will. A significant portion of the investment portfolio is going to go against mission command systems. As I think I've explained to some members before, one of my concerns is making sure that every one of my platforms is completely interlocked, if you will, and from a network perspective in terms of communications architecture and Blue Force Tracker to make sure that all of my formations are completely interoperable from a communications command and control perspective. So priority is really focusing on lethality, mobility, and that netted C2 command and control structure. Circling back to the issue about the cyber specifically, as I think I've mentioned before, from a build perspective, we're in a very good place. So you're correct, Congressman. So 10 cyber protection teams over time building out. We're on a good glide path for that. In fact, what I would say is, and I touched on it a little bit in my opening remarks, part of what we're doing in America's Army Reserve is looking at those places in America where there's rapidly evolving, if you will, digital capabilities, technologies, so cyber, artificial intelligence, all sorts of, if you will, exploding capabilities in the private sector, making sure that the Army Reserve is posturing force structure to be able to retain and in some cases actually assess those capabilities into the Army Reserve, to make that a much more integrated part, if you will, of the Army's linkage, the warfighters' linkage, Department of Defense's linkage to the emerging private sectors. I think I've mentioned I've gone out to see private industry in many locations. We're investing capabilities and we're moving folks, if you will, or billets, opportunities to create structure into those rapidly developing parts of commercial America. So I think we're in a very good place.
Yes, sir, I'll just dive in on that. We're building out in the Marine Corps Reserves 2 cyber protection teams from our Marines who have gotten into the civilian work sector, learned that skill set, and now finding out that we're trying to stand up 2 teams, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast. One at the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force in San Diego, the other one at the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force at Camp Lejeune. What drives these Marines to come back into the reserves to join cyber protection teams is that they're closer to the fight. They want to be with those tactical deploying units that have the potential to go down range and do work wherever the country may need them. So they're excited about getting their boots dirty and deploying downrange with tactical units. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to address this question to the whole panel. General Luckey and I had a conversation yesterday. Thank you for coming by. I really appreciate that conversation. But as citizen warriors and members of the armed forces, reserve people are often called upon to face the challenge in the workforce because people miss work due to their deployments. Please provide the subcommittee with your assessments of how these challenges affect not only readiness, but retention of highly skilled personnel. And what resources or assistance can we provide that'll help you sustain your level of readiness and retention?
So let me just take that first, if I may, very quickly. I would tell you the biggest thing that this committee could do to continue to support America's Army Reserve in this regard is to, if you will, be the influencers that can help me influence other influencers in America. As I've discussed with members of this committee before, in more informal context, part of our challenge is making sure we continue to message, as I said in my opening remarks, to the employers of America that they are strategic partners in national security of the United States of America. And by allowing them, if you will, and encouraging them to understand how fundamentally important their support is to make sure that our soldiers, I would say sailors, airmen, and Marines all have an opportunity to be shared, if you will, between those employers and these teams, it's absolutely critical to us being able to continue to, if you will, take some pressure off our soldiers to be able to do both. So I really don't think this is about money so much as fundamentally it's about messaging and making sure our employers really understand how vital their support continues to be.
And sir, just to complement General Luckey's words, is the idea of partnerships and the idea of leveraging those relationships that these, in our case, sailors and airmen and Marines, that they have not only with their employers, but with friends of the military, and understanding those connection points and whatever constituency gathering, whatever activity that's in place, where we understand the heart and soul of what generates the capability of America's military power, which is our people. And all those programs that support how we take care of our people, whether it's when they get back home, in the repatriation programs, or how we support them when they're forward in the giving the readiness, funding the readiness to be ready to distract them from any problems they may have otherwise. Thank you.
Much the same answer. Sir, thank you for the question. Again, we're at 95% manning across the board, highest I've ever seen it, healthiest I've ever seen it, morale, leadership, esprit de corps, off the top of the charts. Reserve Marines want to be here and serve and go downrange to do good work for our country. The key to that is the public support for their employers. And I think their employers are proud to have Marines in their organizations, but a pat on the back goes a long way, and so the public support, as General Luckey and Admiral McCollum have touched upon, is huge for us and helps out with our retention and the serving.
Yeah, for the Air Force Reserve, as I stated, the 72-hour response time is the tether that we are all on. So with that, we have a great relationship at every wing level across all our 36 wings with the Employee Supported Guard and Reserve. So it's that expectation management between the reservist and the employer that we bring together around the table, so there's no misunderstanding. A perfect example of that would be the airline pilot. General Goldfein last week got us together around the table with 70 airline executives from the majors to the regionals. And we sat around the table and said, we keep tugging on both, either, we have the uniform arm and they have the airline arm of these pilots, and we're pulling them, we're pulling them apart, basically. So we had to sit around the table and basically come to an agreement of how we're going to use this one asset, this national asset that is now becoming a crisis for this country. So that's the perfect example of how we work together with industry, and we're beginning steps to do that, to work our way through this.
Well, I, for one, if you can get the information by a congressional district of the employers that employ members of any of the reserve components, I'm going to make the same request to the National Guard. Our office will personally send them a letter commending them for their service to their country. So if you can get me that information, I'll put my people to work to do that.
Thank you for, when you're talking about messaging, if there's any for this, I have a reserve base, as you mentioned, thank you, in my district, but some way to make sure that we're telling communities how important it is to encourage this with employers. Any ideas, any place where they're doing it really well, if you pass it on to all of us, then we'll encourage that, because that partnership is just vital. Thank you. Mr. Cuellar.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions except to say thank you for what y'all do. We really, really appreciate it. We want to be supportive in any way. I do associate myself to the questions, to the comments also. I'd like to get that follow-up on that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here, and a very heartfelt thank you to all of your families for their service and sacrifice as well. With all the professional military education conducted at Maxwell Air Force Base, I'm well aware of the emphasis that the services place on PME, and rightly so. The investments in education and career development are critical to the development of our next generation of military leaders. That being said, I'm very concerned about possible disparities between reserve and active duty service members with regard to pay and benefits as it relates to PME. While a soldier on active duty receives full pay and credit towards retirement while attending PME courses, a reservist is often balancing, obviously, a civilian career and completing these courses by correspondence. Not only is the reservist not paid, in many cases, the reservist gets no credit towards the retirement. And so what needs to happen to fix this disparity, particularly as it relates towards retirement credit, and how quickly can we make this happen? And I'll be quiet and let you answer. Thank you very much.
So let me jump on that first, if I may, Congresswoman. So I would just tell you, as a soldier who went to the Army War College, and to your point, spent the better part of 2 years doing it by sort of, some of it was virtual, some of it was papers, some of it was, but ruined, I won't say it ruined, it consumed weekends for the Luckey family for a couple of years. And then we'd had the summer sessions where I would go to Carlisle for 2 weeks. I would just tell you that I was completely compensated for the time that I spent at Carlisle and by the Army, and I received a master's degree from the Army War College as part of the program. Candidly, while I got retirement points for the, if you will, the coursework that I accomplished, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that necessarily in some cases I felt that it was. I mean, some of the work was very difficult, frankly. But I would just tell you, I don't, on behalf of the Army, and behalf of America's Army Reserve, I don't think that there is a compensation issue or a credit issue as it pertains to retirement, as it pertains to the professional military education program of the Army. What I would tell you is it is a challenge. My guess is it's true for all the services. It is a challenge for reserve soldiers to balance all the requirements of their lives. But the reality is, I have fantastic soldiers who have support of their families, and by and large, support of their employers. We talked earlier, I didn't touch on this data point, but I think it's relevant. The authorized end strength of the United States Army Reserve, is going back to 199,000, and right now I'm at 198,000 soldiers. So I guess what I would say is, this is not a pressing concern for me. So I respect your question and I appreciate it, but this is not a pressing concern for America's Army Reserve.
Thank you, ma'am, for that question. I would say for the Navy Reserve, it's very similar to what General Luckey just said. The Navy Reserve sailors are motivated, dedicated, and they're absolutely inspiring. And they do have this complexity of the family and civilian jobs. So it is a little bit different to master from just having one focus of their employment. Where the conversations generally go regarding AC, RC ends up in the benefits area. In the case of, we do have an authority right now, the 12304 Bravo, which is basically an authority to let a reservist deploy. So the benefits don't currently match, and I know that the work is underway to address that. So that's where I hear more of the work in the questions.
A great question, ma'am. Thank you for the question. The Commandant of the Marine Corps is focused on building a fifth-generation Marine Corps, highly technical, highly advanced. I need to build a fifth-generation reserve part of that to augment and reinforce. Along with that comes education. But I'm bookended by readiness I have 38 training days to train our Marines ready to go down range, as you've heard me talk about, to be ready to go to combat. So I need to take full advantage, and this is my point, with online training and getting the pay and the benefits between drills, between those 28 days that I don't have them during the month, to bring them up to speed educationally. So we're working towards that, and we have great support in the Marine Corps.
Within the Air Force and the Air Force Reserve, we're moving more towards the virtual. And with that, you know, our folks just achieve greatness. Many of them have, if not all of them, have master's degrees on the officer side. On the enlisted side, those numbers are going up. So this young group coming in just achieve and overachieve. And they're not really concerned about getting compensated for that. They just do it. And same for the professional military education. It's just a requirement and an expectation that we've had, and we just do it.
Thank you all. Yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for General Miller. A couple I'll try to squeeze in, and hopefully you can get to them, and make the committee aware that you are a graduate of a small, unknown university in Columbus, Ohio, called The Ohio State University. And we're grateful for your service, so thank you very much. Two quick questions. One, last year, our committee identified in the report that many reserve facilities do not meet anti-terrorism and force protection requirements, and that these deficiencies result in traffic congestion in surrounding roads, and these congested access points, as we saw recently in the UK with the terrorist attack, can be a major issue. The response from the Air Force Deputy Assistant Secretary of Budget last year stated the requirements would be met in 2022, which in my estimation is way too long to wait for those kind of security measures. So can you comment on that? And the other question is with regard to the C-130Js, and specifically if we have enough with regard to specialty missions. So I'm concerned that those areas and those planes and the training necessary to deal with the specialty missions, that we're not where we need to be with that. So,
regarding the security measures, thank you all for the additional appropriation in 17 for FSRM. We brought in $65 million. You've appropriated $65 million for additions. I just looked at the list. None of those include gates, the security around the installation, so I will go back and see. We do a facilities assessment every year at every base, so I will do a quick review and see where we are lacking in that, and get back with you on that specifically. Regarding the C-130Js, the last recapitalization for the Air Force Reserve for Js was in 2007 at Keesler. And we recapitalized 20, partly for the weather mission there, and then the operational mission there at Keesler. That is the last C-130J that the Air Force Reserve received, and there is none program in the PALM for us. And that is a decision that we, with the Air Force, just due to limited funding, that's where we are on that program. The AMP1 and AMP2 on our H model fleet is critical to the longevity of that mission set. If there were funding that were set aside for the Js for the Air Force Reserve, then I would actually put that in the special missions at Youngstown and the firefighting unit at Peterson. That's where those J models would go if recapitalized, and there would be 16 needed for that. But right now, it's not in the program, and there's just no room in the program given where we need to go for the future fight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a question, but in response to my colleague's opening remarks, Mr. Ryan, I would point out that while Ohio State is an incredible athletic institution, the decor of my Washington office is patterned after your colors. In the National Fencing Championship round, it was Notre Dame 1, Ohio State 2. Thank you, ma'am.
time, your attention to the committee's concerns. Please feel free at any time to remind us or to talk to us more so we can serve you the very best because we respect what you do. This concludes today's hearing. The subcommittee stands adjourned.